CDC expert panel says people should not use the popular nasal flu vaccine during the upcoming flu season.
The CDC's immunization advisory panel says the data shows the FluMist nasal flu vaccine doesn't work. In children between the ages of 2 and 17, the nasal flu vaccine was only 3% effective.
They need an injectable vaccine this year. That's their option.
So come this fall, parents will have two options: get their kids the flu shot or no vaccine at all.
So that was it. They discontinued. They literally took it off the market. The FluMist failed so miserably, 3% effective. And you got to wonder how they even come up with that number. I mean, how did you decide that it worked for 3% of people? Because they didn't get the flu? Maybe they just naturally didn't come in contact with the flu. Well, I came onto the show back in February because we've been at the ACIP meetings. That's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And at that hearing in February, the FluMist came back online. And they said, well, we've tried a new strain of the H1N1, though we really don't have any research or studies showing that it will work any better than the other one. We really couldn't afford to do a bunch of R&D, but we're asking you to put it back on the market because if you don't, then this is really the last year it's available and we're going to have to lose money on it and we'll never see the FluMist again. So shouldn't we just put it back online? Shouldn't the CDC through ACIP recommend it to be back on the schedule? Well, I got up to speak. This is what I had to say to them about the FluMist. Take a look.
And I think what's being missed in this discussion is public perception. It's a very difficult discussion you're having, and watching it's very informative, and no one would want to be having to make the choice you're making. But what I want to point out is that removing FluMist was a big story in this country. And unlike other choices you make, the public is very aware that it was taken away. So when you put it back, the media is going to be very interested in why. And when you have to discuss why, as the CDC, your response looks very flimsy to me that, well, they've changed the H1N1, and though there's no proof of its effectiveness, we're going to go ahead and recommend it. We're talking about at a time where the question of influenza vaccines effectiveness, period, is in massive question in this country. Everyone's hoping to see a better vaccine, a more effective vaccine, maybe a universal vaccine. And when we find out ACIP is just approving an old vaccine that may still be ineffective, maybe even worse than ineffective, or what is currently being used, I really question whether you're going to do serious damage to the perception of ACIP and what you're doing here, and the CDC and what it decides to approve or not approve. The country is looking for a better vaccine, not one that may possibly be less effective than one we're using now. Thank you very much.
I actually think it had an effect. They voted immediately after I spoke on the microphone, and two of the people actually voted no. It was one of the first times I've ever seen a non-unanimous vote on a vaccine. But what was interesting was the discussion after the vote. When they started talking about, all of a sudden someone suggested, is there any way that by this vote we can make it like not a recommendation? Just that we are just making it available? Take a look at the backtracking and the hemming and hawing after a vote, thinking about what I had just said.
Well, I'm worried that, using a baseball metaphor, that we've had two strikes and the 18-19 season would be a third strike.
For the same reasons, I'm really concerned about what this message sends.
Dr. Belongia?
The uncertainty, in my view, does not justify a preferential recommendation.
Dr. Walter?
Yes, I think for the same reasons I would not opt for a preference.
I don't think we have enough data for a preference.
This is tough.
I didn't want to bring this up, but it might make more sense to state this as LIV is not routinely recommended but should be available for individual clinical decision making.
So we've already done the vote on the recommendation. We're looking at a different motion right now, which is to make a preferential recommendation for IIV over LAIV.
Right, I understand that. That's why I didn't want to bring it up.
Amazing the laughter, isn't it? But it's really nothing to laugh about. You see what had happened? These people had all voted yes and then suddenly recognized, well, but hold on a second. That's a recommendation. We're actually saying by that vote, we just said that the vaccine works, and we all know that it very well may not work. So is there any way to maybe make the statement a little bit different, that we've approved it, but it's just because it's available, but it's not really to be used by human beings. It's just there on a shelf to look good, so we fill up pharmacies. I mean, And they had it, like the head of the CDC that's running this meeting has to say to them, let me remind you, you already voted yes, folks, so there's no going back on that. You were never going to hear about this happening behind the scenes because the media that's owned by who? That's right, pharma. This is what they were going to tell you about the great reintroduction of the flu shot. Take a look.
The flu shot may soon be painless again.
The nasal spray is back.
The panel pulled its recommendation for FluMist 2 years ago because it wasn't working against swine flu.
They claim that they have reformulated the FluMist and that hopefully it should be more effective.
It is too soon to tell whether this year's flu season will be as bad as last year's, but it's not too soon to get a vaccine.
We've got a problem because the CDC said anybody can get either the shot or the FluMist, but look what just came out in September from the American Academy of Pediatrics. This was in Stat News. Pediatrics group encourages parents to steer clear of popular FluMist in favor of shots. The American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending children be vaccinated with injectable flu vaccine for the coming season rather than the nasal spray vaccine FluMist. This advice puts the AAP's annual flu vaccine recommendation slightly at odds with those of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which state that any of the flu vaccines available for children could be used for the coming flu season. Have you ever played a baseball team or played in any sport at all where you managed to get the other team so flustered and freaked out they start yelling at each other? Have you ever lost to that team? Have you ever lost to the team that's screaming at each other, kicking, throwing balls at each other, throwing mitts and screaming and yelling at each other? No. No. If the other team is doing that, you win every day and Sunday. I believe we have now got the American Academy of Pediatrics yelling and screaming at the CDC. They are now divided. Now, how about we conquer?